Julian's smug face was almost too much to bear. He stood there, practically radiating arrogance in the Thorn Industries lobby. Lawyers swarmed around him like flies, reporters jostled for position, and he was just eating it up. Complete vindication, he boomed, his voice that perfect blend of Ivy League polish and ruthless ambition. My ex-wife, Serafina Vance, attempted a smear campaign, driven solely by bitterness over our divorce. The courts, bless their hearts, have seen through her fabrications. I am completely exonerated. He even managed a pathetic little shake of his head, like he was some kind of victim. My hand clenched around the strap of my leather messenger bag, the one I'd had since college. It smelled faintly of old textbooks and forgotten dreams, a stark contrast to the sterile, glass and steel environment around me. I forced my expression to remain neutral, a skill I'd honed over years of board meetings and tense negotiations. Let him have his moment. Let him bask in the artificial glow of his self-proclaimed victory. Because I knew something he didn't. He thought he'd won. He thought he'd buried me under a mountain of lies and legal maneuvering. But all he'd really done was light the fuse on his own destruction. Inside my bag wasn't just my wallet and keys and that half-eaten granola bar I always forgot about. It contained the digital failsafe he desperately needed me to destroy, the one thing that could unravel his entire carefully constructed empire. Guess I'm not as good at being destructive as I thought. I had a dark satisfaction thinking about the long nights I'd spent extracting the information and keeping it safe. For the briefest instant, my eyes met his across the crowded lobby. It was like a fleeting connection in a chaotic storm. Behind the manufactured confidence, I caught a flicker of something dark, fear maybe? Or perhaps just a sliver of doubt creeping into the carefully crafted facade. Whatever it was, it fueled me. He really thought he could get away with it. He really thought he was untouchable, insulated by his wealth and power. The audacity of it was breathtaking. I simply smiled, a small, tight smile that I knew would send a chill down his spine if he truly understood its implications. It wasn't a friendly smile, it was the smile of someone with a plan, someone who knew exactly where all the bodies were buried. Congratulations, Julian, I said, my voice even in calm, barely audible above the celebratory din, enjoy it while it lasts. The words hung in the air, a quiet promise of retribution. Then, as if on cue, the heavy glass doors of the lobby swung open, admitting a phalanx of men and women in dark, impeccably tailored suits. They moved with a purpose that cut through the noise like a hot knife through butter. These weren't lawyers or reporters. These were feds. Leading the charge was Special Agent Davies, his face grim, his presence radiating an undeniable air of authority. He completely ignored Julian and his entourage, his gaze fixed solely on me. Ms. Vance, he said, giving a curt nod of acknowledgement. Are you ready? The question wasn't really a question. It was a confirmation, a signal that everything was proceeding according to plan. I took a deep breath, the air suddenly thick with anticipation. The scent of expensive cologne and nervous sweat hung heavy in the air. More than ready, Agent Davies. I glanced back at Julian, whose face had completely drained of color. The smugness was gone, replaced by a look of sheer terror. The victory celebration was officially over. The game was about to begin, and this time I was holding all the cards. My life with Julian Thorn hadn't always been a nightmare. There was a time, a hazy romantic time, when I actually believed in him. When we met, he was charming, undeniably brilliant, and seemingly driven by ambition for all the right reasons. I was a forensic accountant, a meticulous perfectionist driven by a strong moral compass. My idea of a good time was balancing spreadsheets and uncovering hidden patterns in data. We were, or at least I desperately wanted to believe we were, a perfect match. Opposites attract, right? The steady with the whirlwind. He swept me off my feet with grand gestures and whispered promises. Soon, I found myself completely immersed in his world of high finance and hedge funds, jet-setting across the globe and attending glittering galas. He made me the CFO of Thorn Industries, a position that seemed like the culmination of all my professional dreams. It was exhilarating at first. I was good at my job, exceptionally good. I took immense pride in helping him build his empire, brick by painstaking brick. He was my world. But beneath the glossy veneer of success, something was rotten. Like a slow-spreading disease, I gradually began to notice discrepancies in the financial statements, questionable transactions that didn't quite add up. Small things at first, easily dismissed as accounting errors or simple oversights. But they accumulated, growing into a gnawing unease in the pit of my stomach. Julian dismissed my concerns, calling me overly cautious, paranoid even. You worry too much, Sarah, he'd say, his voice laced with a charming condescension that I, foolishly, accepted. I wanted to believe him so badly that I ignored my own instincts. Then came the pressure. Subtle at first, a gentle nudge in a questionable direction. Then increasingly insistent, a demand cloaked in the guise of necessity. Julian needed my expertise to manipulate the numbers, to hide the mounting debt and the increasingly reckless investments he was making. He needed me to cook the books, to create a facade of profitability that was nothing more than a house of cards, built on lies and deception. He insisted it was temporary, just until things straightened out. I refused. I told him I wouldn't compromise my ethics, that what he was asking was not only wrong but illegal. That's when the charm completely evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating ruthlessness that I hadn't seen before, a darkness that lurked beneath the surface. It was like looking into the eyes of a stranger. Our marriage dissolved. It was a messy, ugly divorce filled with accusations and threats. Lawyers circled like vultures, and every conversation became a battleground. Julian, desperate to protect his empire, framed me. He used my position as CFO as the perfect scapegoat, planting evidence to make it look like I was the one who had committed the fraud, the one who had been siphoning money from the company. He bet that my meticulous nature would play against me. The authorities were going to find my fingerprints all over the fake transactions because I, after all, was trained to make sure everything's in order. It was a brilliant, twisted plan. He thought he had me cornered. He thought he'd won. He thought he was the only one playing the game. But he grossly underestimated me. While I was married to Julian, living in his world of deception and greed, I started to see his true colors. I started to understand the full extent of his web of lies and manipulations. So, I did what any smart accountant would do. I started documenting everything. Every shady deal, every suspicious transaction, every conversation where he implicated himself directly or indirectly. I meticulously collected evidence, knowing that one day I might need it to protect myself or even to bring him down. It became my insurance, my secret weapon. A digital trail of breadcrumbs leading straight to his door. And I knew I couldn't fight him alone. Julian had connections, power, and virtually unlimited resources. That's when I contacted the FBI. It wasn't easy. I had to prove my credibility, to convince them that I wasn't just a disgruntled ex-wife seeking revenge. I had to overcome their initial skepticism and demonstrate that I had genuine evidence of serious wrongdoing. But with the mountain of evidence I had gathered, they finally agreed to investigate. Special Agent Davies became my lifeline, my confidant, and my partner in bringing Julian down. He believed me when no one else would. My secret weapon wasn't just the information itself, it was my intimate knowledge of Julian. I knew how his mind worked, how he operated, the patterns of his deception, and what he was likely to do in any given situation. And because of that, I could always be one step ahead, anticipating his moves and countering his strategies. I knew his strengths and his weaknesses, and I knew exactly how to exploit them. With the FBI on board, the real, painstaking work began. We had to build an airtight case, one that would withstand Julian's army of high-priced lawyers and his powerful connections. We worked in secret, often late into the night, poring over documents, tracing complex financial transactions, and interviewing witnesses who were terrified of Julian and his influence. The risk was immense, but the potential reward, justice, was worth it. The best part of the whole operation was watching Julian dig his own grave, one arrogant shovelful at a time. Blinded by his own self-importance, he became increasingly reckless, believing he was untouchable. He used my public shaming to gain sympathy, playing the victim card to anyone within earshot. He spun elaborate tales of how his wife had betrayed him, how he was the innocent party in this whole mess. He even went on television, painting himself as a wronged husband and a successful businessman unfairly targeted by a vengeful ex. He was convinced that he had silenced me, that I would slink away into obscurity, defeated and disgraced, my reputation ruined. He even had the audacity to send me a veiled threat through a mutual friend, a subtle reminder of his power. "Tell Sarah that if she knows what's good for her, she'll stay quiet," the friend relayed, his voice laced with a mixture of fear and pity. I did the exact opposite. I started dropping subtle hints, carefully placed breadcrumbs that would lead Julian to believe he was still in control, that he was manipulating me. I leaked carefully crafted rumors about my supposed financial troubles, making it seem like I was desperate and vulnerable. I wanted him to underestimate me, to think that he had broken me completely. It was a dangerous game, but I knew I had to play it perfectly to lure him into my trap. It worked like a charm. Julian's confidence soared. He became even more careless, making even more mistakes, leaving even more evidence for the FBI to uncover. He was so busy gloating over his perceived victory that he didn't notice the noose tightening around his neck. He was so sure I was defeated that he didn't see the trap closing. Agent Davis told me, with a grim smile, he's so sure of himself that he's practically handing us the keys to his kingdom. Julian's arrogance was our greatest weapon. The day of the vindication press conference was meticulously planned, every detail carefully orchestrated. Julian had invited every major news outlet in the city, eager to publicly humiliate me and cement his image as the wronged victim. He wanted to bask in the spotlight, revel in his triumph, and silence me once and for all. What he didn't know was that the FBI had been waiting for this very moment. They had used the press conference as a trap, knowing that Julian would be at his most vulnerable, surrounded by witnesses and unable to escape. It was the perfect stage for his downfall. That's why, when Agent Davies and his team entered the lobby, Julian's world began to crumble, piece by agonizing piece. The air was thick with tension, charged with an almost palpable energy. The FBI agents moved in with quiet determination, their faces grim and focused. Julian, initially confused and disbelieving, quickly realized what was happening. The color drained from his face, and the smugness vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated panic. He looked like a deer caught in headlights. "What is the meaning of this?" he stammered, his voice trembling despite his best efforts to maintain composure. Agent Davies stepped forward, holding out a warrant for all to see. "Julian Thorne, you are under arrest for securities fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to obstruct justice." The reporters erupted in a frenzy. Cameras flashed, microphones were thrust forward, and the lobby descended into complete chaos. Julian's lawyers scrambled to intervene, but it was far too late. The trap had been sprung, and Julian Thorne was caught squarely in its jaws. As the agents led Julian away in handcuffs, his eyes met mine. They were filled with disbelief, betrayal, and a desperate attempt to understand what had gone wrong. "You," he hissed, his voice laced with venom. "You set me up." I simply smiled, the same small, tight smile I had given him earlier. "Consider it karma, Julian," I said, my voice ice cold. "And remember, you were the one who dealt all the cards." The look on his face was priceless, a mixture of shock, anger, and utter despair. It was the moment he realized that he had lost, not just his freedom, but everything he had worked for, everything he had valued. He had thought he was untouchable. He had thought he was smarter than everyone else. But he had underestimated the power of truth, the resilience of justice, and the determination of a woman he had wronged. The aftermath of Julian's arrest was a whirlwind of activity. The news spread like wildfire, sending shockwaves throughout the financial world. Thorne Industries' stock plummeted faster than a lead weight, and the company's reputation was completely ruined. The empire Julian had so carefully built crumbled before his very eyes. Many of Julian's colleagues and associates suddenly became unavailable, claiming they knew nothing about his illegal activities. Some disappeared altogether, fleeing the country to avoid prosecution. Others had to take the blame for their own wrongdoings, which led to even more arrests and indictments. It's a shame what happens when you associate with someone who believes they hold so much power they're above the law. His family was devastated, of course. His parents, who had always doted on him, were heartbroken and ashamed. They couldn't reconcile the image of their successful son with the reality of his crimes. His siblings distanced themselves, unable to forgive him for the disgrace he had brought upon the family. As for me, I was inundated with calls from reporters, lawyers, and even former colleagues who had once dismissed me, ridiculed me, or actively participated in Julian's smear campaign. I became a reluctant hero, a symbol of integrity and courage. I did a few interviews, sharing the broad strokes of my story and hoping to inspire others to stand up against injustice, even when it seemed impossible. Most importantly, I was vindicated. The charges against me were dropped and my name was finally cleared. I had reclaimed my life, my reputation, and my peace of mind. The weight of Julian's lies had been lifted from my shoulders and I could finally breathe freely again. Years have passed since Julian's arrest. He was convicted on multiple charges and sentenced to a lengthy prison term. Thorne Industries was dismantled, its assets seized and distributed to the victims of his fraud. The empire he'd labored and schemed to build was gone. I moved on, starting a new chapter in my life, one free from Julian's shadow. I used my experience to become an advocate for whistleblowers, helping others who had been wronged by powerful corporations and individuals. I found purpose in fighting for justice and giving a voice to those who had been silenced. I became a beacon of hope for those who felt powerless against the forces of greed and corruption. It wasn't easy. Sharing my story was always a painful process, and the memories of my time with Julian still lingered, like ghosts haunting my past. But I refused to let him define me. I refused to let his darkness extinguish my light. I was determined to use my experience to help others, to prevent them from becoming victims of similar schemes. Today, I am happy and fulfilled. I have rebuilt my life from the ashes of my past, stronger and more resilient than ever before. I have found peace and purpose in my work, and I am surrounded by people who love and support me. The most important lesson I learned from this entire experience is simple: never underestimate the power of truth. No matter how powerful or influential someone may seem, they are not above the law. And no matter how dark the situation may appear, there is always hope for justice. Standing up for what is right may be difficult, and it may come at a price, but it is always worth it. Because in the end, integrity is the only thing that truly matters. Power is fleeting, money is fickle, but your moral compass will guide you through the darkest days and bring you back to the light. Believe in yourself, trust your instincts, and never be afraid to speak truth to power. It's so important to remember.